afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. From the Arcadian Court in downtown Toronto, welcome to the continuation of the 112th season of the Empire Club of Canada. For those of you just joining us either through our webcast or our podcast or on Rogers TV, welcome to our meeting today. Now, before our distinguished speaker is introduced, I'd like to introduce the head table guests to you, and I'd ask each guest please rise for a brief moment and be seated when your name is called. And I'd ask that the audience please refrain from applauding until all head table guests have been introduced. So starting with our guest of honour, the Honourable Navdeep Bains, Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development. Dr. Tom Corr, President and CEO, Ontario Centres of Excellence. Mr. Vezo Sorbot, Director, Corporate Affairs, IPEX Management, Inc., who, by the way, Vezo, I hope you don't, this is really amazing. I've never done this before, but he just told me the most incredible story. He met his wife at his first Empire Club event a few years ago. So everyone take a look at the table around you. You never know. Ms. Anita Gupta, President and CEO, NMI Tax Consulting Group, and a Director of the Empire Club of Canada. The Honourable Reza Moridi, the Minister of Training, Colleges and Universities, and the Minister of Research and Innovation. Welcome, Minister. Mr. Sunir Chandaria, the President of LePage's and Vice President of Conrose Corporation. Mr. Kent Emerson, Director of Operations from the Office of the Minister of Finance and a Director of the Empire Club of Canada. And Kent was largely responsible for bringing the Minister to us today, so huge thank you to you, Kent. But we also want to wish you best of luck. We understand you're about to start your new job as Vice President, Stakeholder and Municipal Affairs at the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation. So best of luck. One of our great past presidents, Mr. Noble Chamar, partner at Castles Brock and Blackwell, LLP. Public Affairs Practitioner Extraordinaire, Mr. Bob Richardson, Executive Vice President, Edelman Canada, and Vice Chair of Ontario Centres of Excellence. And my own MP, Mr. Brian May, Liberal MP for Cambridge, Ontario, Chair of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills and Social Development. Brian's presence with us today is no coincidence, as he will be one of the MPs helping our guest today implement new innovation strategies as they are developed. And I'm proud, Brian, of all the work you're doing in my riding. So thank you for being with us today. My name is Gordon McIver. I'm the Executive Director of the National Executive Forum on Public Property and the President of the Empire Club of Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, your head table. Thank you to the generosity of Sunir Chandaria and the Conrose Corporation, and thanks to them we have a group of students with us today from the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University. And as many of you will know, Minister Bains served as a distinguished visiting professor at the Ted Rogers School of Management, where he hosted a speakers series for MBA students and developed a mentorship program for those students. So students, please rise and be recognized. Welcome. Renaming Industry Canada, traditionally one of the most powerful ministries of our federal administration, was almost without any controversy when the new Trudeau government was set up last fall. After all, most Canadians recognize that this department had to reflect the new economy with an emphasis on technology, innovation and R&D. In other words, more emphasis on fibre optics and laboratories as fundamental components of a new economy. The freshly minted Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development would be a bridge between the important Liberal Party theme of new economy innovation and old economy subsidies, providing a clear path forward for growth, jobs and thriving industry. Even in old-school industries such as the auto sector, there was an increasing recognition on the part of the newly elected government that there were far more issues than low wages in such areas as Mexico when it comes to attracting and maintaining jobs. There was also science and innovation, and with that powerful combination, Canada could strategically position itself to become more competitive in global marketplaces, while at the same time shoring up the quality of life for the millions of us Canadians who work in industry. Now, while the whole technology component of these discussions is a relatively new discussion, this podium has welcomed numerous leaders from all levels of government to discuss industrial strategy since we were founded back in 1903. It could be argued, in fact, that it's been one of our most abiding and popular topics examined at the club in the past 112 years. Almost a century ago, in the spring of 1919, just after the First World War ended, the man who would become the longest-serving Prime Minister of Canada stood at this very podium and delivered one of the most famous Empire Club speeches of all times. It was entitled, "The Four Parties to Industry," calling on the war-weary nation to remember that industry was the key to its success at home and abroad, and that nothing could be achieved without strong partnerships and good relations between the various segments of society. Now, if you haven't guessed already, I'm of course referring to William Lyon Mackenzie King, who was less than 2 years away from sweeping the Liberal Party to power and becoming Canada's 10th Prime Minister. A workaholic bachelor who's often remembered today as the man who got us through the Second World War during his several terms in office. Like our guest speaker today, he was the graduate of a Toronto university who loved to understand connections and what made people and processes work well and lead to success. Here's a brief excerpt from that speech from March 13th, 1919. With the new spirit must come also a wholly new conception of industry. No longer must industry be thought of as a mere revenue-producing process in which capital, labour, management, and the community meet like so many rival and contending factions, each to appropriate to itself by force or might the largest possible share of the fruits of industry. Industry must be thought of, as in reality it is, as in the nature of social service, and participation in industry, whether it is in the form of labour or capital investment, as social service of the highest kind, since upon its successful accomplishment rest all other forms of human service. Now, following in the footsteps of William Lyon Mackenzie King, we're delighted today to welcome Minister Navdeep Bains to the Empire Club, as many pundits will be watching closely as Canada continues to focus on creating a 21st century economy, which does not subtract from the hewers of wood and drawers of water strategies of yesteryear, but rather adds a new focus on R&D, which will lead this government to better understand why we still score poorly, at least according to the Conference Board of Canada reports, in OECD peer countries for innovation. Minister Navdeep Bains is well positioned for this job and to improve this situation, having achieved a great deal of experience in Parliament from his role as critic for the former Public Works Government Services, Treasury Board Secretariat, International Trade, Natural Resources, and Small Business and Tourism. Before that, he was Privy Councillor and Parliamentary Secretary to Prime Minister Paul Martin, as most of you will recall, and an adjunct lecturer and visiting professor at both the University of Waterloo and the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University. His private sector experience at organizations such as the Ford Motor Company of Canada gives him a tremendously well-rounded background, preparing him for his present role, which of course is a role requiring an understanding of both new and traditional industries. While he's not as famous as William Lyon Mackenzie King, or at least not quite yet, he will quite possibly be remembered long after we're all gone as the man who put us back on the road to future growth, where government is not seen as an adversary, but rather as a partner in helping give the industries of our nation the best possible advantage in the global economy. So for that reason, we view his appearance at the Empire Club this week as a very important one. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Member of Parliament for Mississauga Malton and Canada's Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, the Honourable Navdeep Bains.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for that very kind introduction, that very warm welcome. And thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here this afternoon. And what a great turnout, I must say. And I think this whole innovation thing is really catching on. Je suis honoré d'être ici aujourd'hui. And I'm also pleased to be here on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. And it's an honor to be here at the Empire Club, an organization with an amazing history and a little bit of romance, with very impressive speakers from Winston Churchill to every Canadian Prime Minister since Borden. Pendant plus d'un siècle, vous avez accueilli plus de 3500 conférenciers et façonné l'opinion publique au pays. Minister Maridi, my colleague and Member of Parliament Brian May, and of course, I think Marco Mendocino is here as well. There he is. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to talk about why innovation matters. It's a very important subject and why it's important now, where we're strong and where we have work to do in the Canadian innovation landscape, and to give you a sense of the bold action I intend to take as your Minister of Innovation. We meet here at a very historic and transformative time for this country and indeed the world. There are major global forces at play that require us all to embrace a new way of doing things. So I want to set the context today about the global forces at play before I get into our innovation agenda. First, there's an international impetus to act on climate change and accelerate the transition to a low-carbon future. A consensus is emerging that we need to ensure that all growth is clean growth through the adoption of clean tech across all sectors of the economy. So again, clean tech is prevailing in every single aspect of our economy. Second, the world economy is uncertain, with tepid demand, particularly in established economies like ours, and the weakness in commodity prices. Many feel that we're entering a new era of slower economic growth. And that's very important to realize as well, because that's what we ran on. We ran on the understanding that times are difficult, the economy is not growing as fast as it needs to, and we need to make investments. Third, the world has entered a new industrial age. Technology is changing all aspects of our lives, including how we live and how we do business. And I'm talking about the Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, and I must say, when I was in Detroit, it was all about autonomous vehicles. It was all about software power, not horsepower. Quantum computing, you're probably familiar with that subject now. The Prime Minister has put us on the map on that. Additive manufacturing, clean tech. These developments are transforming traditional sectors and also creating sectors we couldn't even imagine just a few years ago. We have whole new industry, whole new sectors, whole new jobs. Lastly, these economic and technological changes come with important social changes. There are mounting concerns about rising inequality, that's a fact, ladies and gentlemen, within and across our nations, and how we deal with the challenges of an aging population. And I'm not talking about Atlantic Canada or parts of Quebec. I'm talking about from coast to coast to coast. This is a challenge that we're dealing with. And how we address the needs of those who don't have yet the skills to succeed in a changing economy. Given the confluence of global trends, it is frankly our duty to act, and act now. The countries that will succeed in this new environment are those that understand and embrace these factors and choose a new path. The new path is one that recognizes that innovation is essential, whether in developing new technologies, new processes, or even new business models altogether. My father came to Canada in the early 70s with a few dollars in his pocket, and many of you have heard this story. And I remember him telling me people were saying in his village, really, $5? You're going to succeed in another country with $5 in your pocket? But he was ambitious. He was a risk taker, and he believed in himself. And he knew that Canada was a country where if you worked hard, your children would have better opportunities than you did. And that was the idea of Canada that motivated him and so many others like him, generations of immigrants coming to Canada. And the result is very clear. I've been blessed with opportunities he couldn't even imagine when he came to this country. And I too am a father. I've got two beautiful young girls, Nanki and Kirpa, 8 and 5. And when I get up every day, I'm driven, as my father was, to do everything I can to give them the best possible opportunities. But if Canada is going to be that place where our children can have opportunities to succeed and reach their potential, our responsibility is to make a bold bet on innovation. We have to recognize that we have a collective responsibility now, ladies and gentlemen, to bet on innovation and doing things differently. Because at the end of the day, innovation isn't an end to itself. It's the path to growth. Remember, I talked about the challenges around growth. The path that leads to a stronger middle class, something our government is absolutely focused on, and good quality jobs for all Canadians. That's what innovation is about. That's why innovation matters. If we had any doubt that we needed to act, we need only to look at how other countries around the world are dealing with global changes that we talked about. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a race. We are in an innovation race, and the stakes are very, very high. China and the US are the two most powerful competitors, investing billions of dollars trying to stay at the top of the leaderboard in almost all the technological categories. Germany, the largest economy in the EU, is an innovation superpower. It's built one of the most effective innovation ecosystems in the world using the Fraunhofer Institutes to translate ideas into value creation. And if you even look at smaller jurisdictions, they're moving the yardsticks as well by being very strategic in their investments. Israel is a great example. It's a hotbed of innovation, startups, and it makes bets on them. And those bets are paying off. Sweden, despite its small population, is consistently able to drive higher rates of R&D in government and in business and in private sector. Jamais il n'était aussi important pour le Canada d'avoir une stratégie claire en matière d'innovation, une stratégie qui démontre notre intention de devenir un chef de file international. Nous devons agir sans aucune hésitation, agir maintenant. As you know, the Prime Minister Trudeau has asked me to lead the creation of an innovation agenda for Canada. And I must say, I'm absolutely humbled and honored to take on this challenge. To that end, I've spent 6 months, and it's been a fast 6 months, I must confess. Time has flown by, meeting with many Canadians, academics, business and community leaders, entrepreneurs, many of you that I've met in this room, young, innovative leaders of tomorrow, entrepreneurs, researchers. I've literally spoken to hundreds of CEOs in Canada and abroad. And I wanted to gain a better understanding. The purpose of these conversations was to really genuinely gain a better understanding of the issues at play across every region of this country. We live in a very diverse country with diverse needs and diverse perspectives. And I wanted a sense of how these global forces impact local realities. I wanted to take stock and understand where we're performing well in light of all these changes and where we need to take bold new steps. Where are the opportunities? And what I've learned is that each of us plays our part in the innovation landscape. And we have successes to celebrate, but we also have some opportunities that we need to seize on. For example, when it comes to knowledge and technology, in this area, Canada has important strengths. We are one of the most educated populations in the world, and our researchers, they punch well above their weight in terms of academic publications and key discoveries. And I always talk about this stat because it's important to do so. We got to brag. You got to be proud of it. We represent 0.5% of the global population, or slightly less than that. You know, the aging population issue, and we need more immigration, but that's a separate issue I'll get to. But we produce 4% of the world's publications. This country does, however, have a persistent problem, and it was alluded to earlier as well, with businesses underinvesting in R&D. In fact, Canada ranks 22, as you mentioned, 22 out of 34 countries in the OECDs. So businesses, my message to you is very clear. We need to step up. I've also been looking at talent. This is a very important foundation when it comes to the innovation and taking stock. And it's a very important part of our landscape here as well. Now, on one hand, we have a mobile, skilled workforce. We're the first among OECD countries for % of the population with a tertiary education. But our society is also inclusive and multicultural. Look around you. This is very unique. I look like I'm standing here at the United Nations. This is really impressive. And we all know that we do a good job of welcoming people from around the world. And of course, the Prime Minister set the bar really high when he welcomed more than 25,000 Syrian refugee families. However, on the other hand, our businesses aren't acting globally. And they're not globally oriented as our people. Too many of them do not participate in global supply chains. So we're not really leveraging our diaspora. We're not really leveraging our talent. I've also been thinking about our infrastructure. So talent's important, but what about infrastructure in light of the technological change that we've seen? And we're doing what we need to do to make sure that we have a strong, are we really doing what we need to do to have a strong digital backbone? Here too, the story is a bit mixed. On one hand, 94% of Canadians have access to one of the best digital networks in the world. 94%. And I must confess that number will go up to 98% as we continue to invest in the Connecting Canadians program, which will make sure we exceed our targets. But on the other hand, there remains an important digital divide. In fact, there are two divides I want to talk to you about. First are the social factors that still remain, that still mean that in many of our largest urban centers, including Toronto, right here, many low-income people are left out of the digital economy. They simply can't afford to pay the high fees. And in the north and in rural areas, there's a different kind of a digital divide because there simply isn't any access. There are many communities in Canada that are big enough to have a school, a medical clinic, and apparently not big enough to have access to broadband internet connectivity. That's just unacceptable. That's why in our budget on March 22nd of this year, we were obviously very, very disappointed to see that number. And that's one of the reasons why we invested and committed to investing $500 million to make investments needed to make our digital economy more inclusive. That's about fiber connectivity to our institutions, to those 1,300 communities that I was talking about. I also want to briefly talk about regulations and standards. And I've been thinking a lot about regulations and standards because this is an area definitely where the government can play a meaningful role, a role that I hear a lot from businesses. We're one of the best countries in the world to start up a business. That's a fact, ladies and gentlemen. We're very, very good at starting up businesses. Last year alone, a net new 11,000 new businesses were started. But I think we can do more. We need to make sure regulations just don't work against us and against the creativity that is driving disruptive new ways of doing business. The same is true for international standards. So it's not about a domestic regulatory framework that we need to be mindful of. Because we're competing globally, because we want to compete globally, we need to be mindful of international standards. We need to be leaders, not followers, and work internationally to shape the standards that will guide our products to market. And another element of Canada's innovation landscape that must be considered is market access. This is again something that businesses have told me time and time again, from SMEs to large corporations. Our strength here is that we have an enviable number of trade and investment agreements. And I can tell you right now, we have an incredible ambassador and the Minister of International Trade, Chrystia Freeland, who's working very hard to make sure we implement CETA and paving the way for global market access for firms, not only in that jurisdictions, but across the globe. But Canadian businesses don't make most of these agreements, missing opportunities created by access to those markets. That's the disappointing part. That's the frustrating part. As a country made up primarily of small businesses, and we really are an SME country, I'd like to see more than 10% of them exporting to other places other than the U.S. The flow of goods and services within our own domestic border is also really important. Here in Ontario, we've seen great leadership, and I've had the privilege of working with our mutual colleague, Minister Dogood, as chair of the process to modernize the agreement on internal trade. And I'm absolutely hopeful and confident that we will have a renewed agreement. But I also want to say that as an individual, I've gotten to know and respect Minister Dogood, and I wish him a speedy recovery from his recent health issues. The other point I want to talk about when it comes to our innovation landscape, I've talked about talent and regulations, I've talked about the market access, is really capital. This issue again comes up time and time again. And it's another major aspect of innovation landscape, one that I heard a lot about with my conversations with business leaders. On the plus side, Canada is well known for our stable markets and low corporate tax rates. And the availability of VC or venture capital is going in the right direction. So we are definitely headed in the right direction. To give you an example, last year, VC investments totaled $2.3 billion. That's a significant increase. But here's the rub. We still don't have the kind of patient risk capital that permits our companies to start here, grow here, and create jobs here over the long term. And we need to ask why that is, and we need to take steps to address it. So ladies and gentlemen, summing up, Canada is uniquely placed to excel in the new global economy. We have enormous strengths, which are our people, and we can't underestimate that. I can tell you right now, when I travel abroad, when I meet with world leaders and business leaders, I continuously brag about our people. It truly is a competitive advantage. Our academic leadership I talked about produces some amazing discoveries. Our citizens are diverse and open to the world, and our businesses enjoy low taxes in a strong regulatory environment. And we don't need any more studies, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think I need to conduct another study to highlight those issues. It's been well documented. I've gone through all the reports. You know, over the Christmas holidays, I had the opportunity to read through Mr. Wilson's report and talk to him about it, the Jenkins report and talk to him about it, Peter Nicholson's report and talk to him about it. You get the idea, right? So I can go on and on. We've done enough studies. We've done enough reports. We understand the challenges. Now it's clear we need to take some bold steps. And that's what the Prime Minister has challenged me to do. He said, look, now people are looking for action now. They're looking for a government to play a leadership role. And that's what I'm going to do. And I look to you in this room to help me with this. And I'll explain why. Because we must work on growing companies in all sectors at home. We have world-leading startups, but too few of them grow up here in Canada. And we need those jobs here at home. So scaling up, ladies and gentlemen, scaling up is at the heart of our longer-term economic growth. Canada needs to remain successful. We need large, strong Canadian brands who have global mandates, that do R&D here, that invest here, that have the head office here. For this to happen, businesses and post-secondary institutions, governments, and other innovation stakeholders need to work together and more strategically. These connections are critical to transforming today's ideas into the products and services of tomorrow. That's why you saw us make a very important investment and honor a platform commitment. We're investing $800 million in innovation networks and clusters. These aren't just going to be your ordinary clusters. These are going to be super clusters. These are going to be the areas where we can genuinely leverage our competitive advantage to succeed globally. There's also great opportunity right now for Canada to capitalize on young but rapidly expanding global clean tech market by ensuring that our startups are able to grow in this area. That's why in our budget, we made some major down payments towards the goal of making Canada an international clean tech leader. We sent a clear message to the market, saying this is an area we're going to bet on, not as only as a moral imperative to deal with climate change, but we know innovation and clean tech is going to be key. So that's why we're providing over $1 billion to encourage investments in clean tech and to bring new forms of these technologies to market faster. But it's not only clean tech. We also need to, as I said when I was analyzing the situation when it comes to our digital competitiveness, we also need to be able to properly compete in today's digital world. We must advance our digital economy across all sectors and encourage digital adoption to improve competitiveness. So again, everything is being digitized, ladies and gentlemen, in every sector of our economy. It's not simply ICT. You can go to agriculture, you can go to health, you can go to any forestry, mining, resource-based sectors. Any sector you look at is being digitized. So this is about infrastructure and also education and skills development, and about ensuring that companies in traditional sectors are using new technologies to reach their full potential. It's about ICT adoption, especially when you compare ourselves to the US. We're at 51% versus our US peers when it comes to ICT adoption. So only in this way will Canada fully access the unlimited potential of interconnected global economy. Of course, when it comes to the entrepreneur and creative society, there must be bold action to cultivate an entrepreneurial and creative society. Can we get to a place where innovation is thought of as a core Canadian value? Think about that. We always talk about Canadian values of equality, of being inclusive. But what about innovation? Why can't that be a core Canadian value? I believe so. And if we properly leverage our talent and our diversity, it will become a reality. Just earlier this week, I visited a school in Yellowknife, and it was pretty cool to go this time of year, where young kids, about the age of my girls, so this is how I live vicariously through other kids when I see them, and I think of my girls, were being taught fun and creative ways about the importance of computers and technology to their futures. Many of those children were from Indigenous communities where their parents didn't have those opportunities. For these kids, being Canadian is about being on the cutting edge of technology and innovation. That's the norm I want for all kids, from all Indigenous communities, and from communities across Canada. So as you know, it's important to have action. It's important to play a leadership role, but we got to measure it. So I should add that underscoring all our actions will be a commitment to showcasing Canadians' tangible progress on the creation of an innovation agenda. You may have heard of this term that the Prime Minister's used, and it was used at a retreat just a few days ago when we were in Kananaskis, the term deliverology. It's a big word. It took me a few days to figure it out. But it's a very, very simple concept, which is that we're all be measuring and reporting our progress so people can see how we're doing, and we're going to make sure we honor our commitments. This approach dovetails perfectly with our stated commitment to evidence-based policy making. And remember, on day one when I was announced the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, we reintroduced the mandatory long-form census. So it's very consistent with our government's DNA. We want to take bold action, of course, as I mentioned, to make Canada the most innovative country in the world. But no matter how bold we are, government is but just one voice in a national conversation. Make no mistake, we are just one part of the puzzle. We need to call everyone to action in this if it's going to be real. We need firms to embrace investments in technology like never before. We need our post-secondary institutions to continue their work in basic research, but also partner with industry like never before. We need all levels of government to embrace this as a national priority. Simply put, this will be a whole-of-society initiative requiring fundamental shift in the way we think. It is going to be a true collective responsibility. You heard me earlier talk about my 2 young girls. Ultimately, when we talk about why we need to take action on innovation agenda, it really boils down to our children, as I said. That's why we need to do this. It's about strengthening the middle class. It's about saying, look, if you want to live the Canadian dream, innovation is important. And it's about growing Canada with more and better quality jobs. So making sure that our children and grandchildren have better opportunities. Ours, of course, is an ambitious set of goals. But I have every confidence in the capacity and the ability and talent of Canadians to work together to achieve them, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you very much for this opportunity and look forward to working with you for years to come. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Minister. And here to express our collective appreciation from the Ontario Centres for Excellence, Mr. Tom Corr.
Thank you, Minister Bains, for a very informative and inspiring discussion. You remind us of how fortunate we are to live in a country with such vast resources and rich potential based upon our highly diverse and creative population. I know that many in this room, including those of us from the Ontario Centres of Excellence, are very encouraged by you and your government's strong inclination towards investing in an innovation-driven economy. We applaud your government's resolve to rebuild our economy through strategic investments in infrastructure and clean technology. Your commitment to clean technology as a means of addressing climate change while also building upon a strong and diversified economy is the right course for Canada. This investment in the environment will undoubtedly translate into increased productivity, job growth, and increasingly competitive economy. We look forward to working closely with your ministry to support innovation in Ontario and the development of an innovation agenda for Canada. It has been a great pleasure having you here today. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Tom, and thank you to the Ontario Centres for Excellence for being today's sponsor. Also like to thank IPEX for being our VIP sponsor, and to the Conrose Corporation for being our student table sponsor. We would also be remiss if we did not thank the National Post, which is our national print media sponsor, and we'd also like to thank mediaevents.ca, which is Canada's online event space for live webcasting today's event on a global level. And as probably most of you know by now, most people see Empire Club of Canada events now through our online space. Follow us on Twitter at Empire_Club, and please also check us out on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We'd also welcome you to join us again. We have some great events coming up in the coming weeks, including William Charnetsky, the Chief Health Innovation Strategist for the Province of Ontario, will be joining us on May the 4th. We have Thomas Wellner, the President and CEO of Revera, who will be here on May the 30th. And Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Beverly McLaughlin, will join us on June 3rd to talk about the changing legal landscape in Canada and how it has impacted the country's first 150 years of history. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attendance today. This meeting is now adjourned.